in random places.
And people like nice enough to do it downtown. That's pretty awesome. Like, 'cause you know it's all your hip friends, and they're gonna sell all their hip stuff.
Right, right.
Yeah, so you end up with cool stuff. So.
Yeah, I go to this yard sale down in Rhineley I try to go every year. I go every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
But Rhineley is like on Route 24, like after Winnerstown, before Stewartstown.
Oh, okay.
It's a tiny little place, and it used to be like sort of the center of it used to be this Lutheran church that a couple of years ago, the pastor there punched somebody in the congregation.
Oh,
so it's not a Lutheran church anymore, and the pastor isn't there anymore. So that makes it weird. But it used to, be this little town like full of farmers and just old folks, and they were always selling really awesome old folks and farmery stuff. So.
Oh my god, yeah. Old folks have the coolest stuff.
Yeah.
And they don't even know it. And that like we collect down in the display is a set of I think it's like the style is boomerang. It's like that mid-60s or mid-50s vintage look to it.
Okay.
Really nice, and it was one of the lesser bought patterns, but like we found most of a set at the Goodwill once because somebody just had it and didn't know what to do with it.
Oh yeah, my grandparents had all this really beautiful like gold leafed wheat like porcelain ware.
Mm-hmm.
Like it had this beautiful little like wheat pattern on it, and I see that stuff in antique shops all the time, but
yeah,
like, we ate off this as kids. But.
that's the weird thing too. Like, I treasure old electronics and stuff like that, recording equipment, and it's like somebody at some point just used it every day for their thing, and they just had no reason to worry about it.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
if you want to pop those headphones on, you can. You'll hear yourself speak directly, so we can make sure the levels are good. Just adjust the mics.
Okay.
No, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, I need you to be as on
right,
it. You're
right up on it.
Yeah, I was gonna, and actually, believe it or not, there was a study done that women's voices, the pitch, it's harder for men to hear, and most of my listeners are dudes.
Yeah. I think women hear higher tones, higher frequencies, and men hear lower frequencies.
Yeah, so
higher rate.
And it was a study. I forget what I heard it on one of the big radio stations wherever, like somewhere in Maryland or Virginia, and they were like, "Oh, that's what see, ladies, that's your husband's. It's not that he's not listening to you. It's that he just naturally can't hear." And I was like, "Oh well, you had to make a farce of it, but that is really cool." Neat information, neato information.
When I first went to college, I studied video production.
Mm-hmm.
And my audio teacher, like, that was like one of our sort of first lessons, like.
Was leveling.
Yeah, and like, it's really important, I think, as an artist to be aware of your audience. So knowing who you're playing to is probably important and tweaking in that way.
Yeah, I obsess and I listen to stuff in the truck, and my truck noise is really high, so I need to if something's poorly recorded or I'm listening to like a Skype interview or something on a podcast, I can't do it. Like it makes it impossible to hear even at 135 decibels.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm a little bit of a lunatic about sound levels. So
I currently have these tires that make this insane noise that is they hum between 45 miles an hour and 55 at like this pitch that just makes me want to murder people.
Oh,
So I either am like always speeding up or like pissed off.
Are you in like an all-wheel drive car that's just like knobby tires or something goofy?
No, I bought a Jeep Liberty and they're not highway tires.
I gotcha. Those are cute. I have a Wrangler. I don't know. There's something about them too. Like, I guess people are into them.
Yeah.
People love the Wrangler. I don't particularly know why. Mine's cost me $1,500 a year for the past 5 years. Every time I go to get an inspection. Well,
really?
Yeah. It's an older Jeep. They just do that. So.
I had before this a '99 Jeep Cherokee. Mm-hmm. Just like the regular.
Oh, the old square body. Mm-hmm. Oh, those are great.
And with the the straight six.
Mm-hmm. I had
280,000 miles, man. It is the best thing I've ever paid $5,000 for.
Yeah, I got one as a my dad picked one up at an auction once. It was like an antiques auction, and they were selling off this Jeep, and I think it was a '97 Cherokee Sport, and it was just fantastic shape. It had like 185,000 miles on it, and that thing ran like a dream. And he paid $1,200 for it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the older Jeeps are definitely where it's at. But that's not where that's absolutely not what we're here to talk about today.
No, I'm just killing time trying to figure out if my voice sounds okay.
No, yeah, I was gonna say you sound good. I'm gonna tweak you just a touch. Okay. Yeah, you're good there. Yeah, but these mics are weird. They'll like they're weird because they're actual good quality mics, so they pick up way more noise, and I'm kind of surprised by that because I bought them on purpose instead of at a yard sale. So I'm here with Jess Mcpherson.
McPherson.
Yes. I was gonna say you only have one E in between your PH and your R, and I brought you on today because I want to know. I'm stuck on the idea of lost history, not in the cinematic sense, not in like trying to figure out what happened in Roanoke Island, like that. That's fun. That's a fun mystery, but the idea that the constant pulse of digital media is kind of making everything go to the wayside, where stuff that would have been like when I was young. You're a Conestoga?
There's a important differentiation there, and I hope that like we can talk about it.
Yes, I'd love to. Please feel free.
I identify as a Susquehanna Indian, and that's a sort of a multi-ethnic group of displaced Indians. My family are Shawnee people. Because I'm so closely rooted here, and this is the earth that I'm made of, and the water that I'm made of, I think of myself as a Susquehanna Indian, and it's sometimes complex to introduce myself that way because people immediately go to Susquehannocks and aren't they extinct? And
right. Well, I was going to say that is the thing with being in South Central Pennsylvania is that you think of the Susquehannock because they were prevalent here and Binghamton and a little farther north up the banks of the Susquehanna, and this is like what 15. I just read about it yesterday. It was like 1560s or something. There was a census taken where they were just north of Washington, D.C., and they all were the Susquehannock tribe, and they followed all the way up into New York State, but not as far north as not super far north, but like most of Pennsylvania. They just kind of were there, and there were big clusters of them. And yeah, you go ahead because my history is not there.
Like not into New York, where like Iroquois territory proper, because they weren't a part of the Confederacy.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. 1500s to like late-ish 1600s.
Right. Well, from what I remember going to the Indian last time I went to the Indian Steps Museum, which is it's a really fascinating place, is that they were prevalent around here and they traded furs with the French, and they seemed like just kind of farmers. They were just doing their thing, and they were kind of more of a peaceful people.
Susquehanna, wow. Historically, they're pretty brutal, brutal tribe. Yeah, they regularly go raiding up and down, through Virginia down to everyone was raiding the Catawbas in the Virginias and Carolinas. Like I don't know what they were doing, but people were just going down and brutalizing them a lot, unfortunately. But so the Susquehannocks, as we think of them in the way that John Smith encountered them sort of in 1608 or 09 or whatever it was, he talked about them a lot as like these massive warriors, like 9 feet tall with 3 foot, shins, like just really, and wearing bear heads on their shoulders and just really all this fantastic stuff that is probably rooted in some truth. There are some really intensely tall people, and all the Europeans at that time were severely malnourished and very small. But maybe not so like fantasy in the sort of sci-fi like
Yeah,
way
well,
that,
yeah,
that leads you
yeah,
to
you're
think.
like, oh, there were
Yeah.
9-foot natives, so obviously yeah, so
Right.
obviously they came down from space and they were there. Yeah,
And
not in that kind of sense, but
right. And I mean, additionally, he couldn't get up to the Susquehanna to where they were. It was very rocky, and they couldn't take ships up that far. So where the party came down and met him is not like where their village necessarily was, and not this far up the Susquehanna at all.
no,
But
and
you know, if you're an explorer and you have a sort of sense of ego, as I assume John Smith must have, it is probably really important to say, like, these people were insane and you don't want to go there because they're really, like, you know, you don't want to discover something I didn't discover.
right,
But on the truth side of things, the English, when they encountered Susquehannocks, were very surprised, and Shawnees and the rest of eastern people sort of north of Virginia, they were very surprised that we already had trade goods and we could speak you know, a modicum of French and things like that, because we had already been trading with the French and the Dutch and people who got here before the English.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say yeah because the 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 logical path is even all the way down to Delaware, Maryland. Montreal's not that far, and the French territories are not that far, and they were in, you know. So it seems like history on its own for some reason just somehow conversationally starts when the English came over, and it's like, well, there was a lot of stuff going on beforehand, because the Confederacy of the Iroquois was 7 different states wide, wasn't it? Or it was 7 different tribes.
I mean, it's pretty massive. Initially, it was 5 tribes.
Okay.
The Onondaga, the Oneida, the Mohawk, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. And then in the early 1700s, like after the Tuscarora War in the Carolinas, Tuscarora moved up to New York and joined them and became the 6th nation. Just a lot of times now you hear them called the 6 Nations, or the Iroquois. They call themselves the Haudenosaunee.
Oh, okay. Well, and to get back on track with the Susquehannock story was that because it does roll back into the Iroquois, was later on, after John Smith met with the Susquehannock a couple of years later at the Lancaster Workhouse, and I have it here. I was gonna say I wrote it all down because my brain just doesn't work that well. It was the Lancaster Workhouse, Conestoga Town, and there was the Christian Hershey Farm thing. That's where it seems like the history of the Susquehannock kind of stops, because they were, I forget what happened at the workhouse, but they were slaughtered. They were 19.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the thing
Yeah.
that anyone in this area would remember.
Right. So the middle part of that is the Susquehannocks were here in that time of John Smith and early colonial times, and there were a lot of, like, trading for beaver and for various, you know, trade goods, led to sort of like infighting and people who wanted to control that trade in a better way. So the Iroquois proper, like the Confederacy, sort of came down and really decimated what was left of the Susquehannocks as a large individual tribe. Obviously, they had been victim to smallpox and everything, like so many of us were. So the remaining Susquehannocks at that time, that's probably like mid to late 16, maybe mid 1600s, I'll say. The remaining Susquehannocks, some of them went down to be with the Meherrin people, who are another Iroquois tribe in the Carolinas, and my Meherrin friends have talked to me about this. They say they stayed there for a couple of years, not a long time. It's not like they were really absorbed into the Meherrins or anything, but then they came back north. And a lot of I'd say the majority of the people went to be, or were taken to be, with the Senecas. After several years, the Senecas, you know, let a handful of them return to their, you know, what they were considering their homelands on the Susquehanna, which would be Conestoga. And at that time in history, and if you're reading the like Pennsylvania history books, you'll see like this. It's like almost a confusion that you see come over historians and English people and colonists, because suddenly they want to be called Conestogas. And I read that so many times, like increasingly the Susquehannocks prefer to be referred to as Conestogas. Susquehannock was not a name they gave themselves. That was a name that like Southern people told John Smith that they were calling them. So that's never what they called themselves. Probably always they called themselves Conestoga.
Oh, okay.
And that's based on the place where they were staying.
Right, because this very specific sect of the tribe was on the eastern side of the Susquehanna River.
Yeah.
Down, it would be 222, like you're going down to Ocean City ish.
Yep.
On that side of the like Conowingo Dam area, and or a little farther
north,
a little
like
farther
Manor
north.
Township and
Okay, yeah, just for anybody that needed a point of reference.
yeah, you'll if you have been following anything about the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline, it's really right around where all of those protests are being held.
Oh, okay.
So Manor Township area in southern Lancaster County is a large part of that. But yeah, so the Conestoga, they come back to the lower Susquehanna, and they're living there. They're peaceful. They're living with the colonists, and they're farming, and they're making baskets, and they're participating in trade, and they, have agreed to live as brothers with the colonists.
Mm-hmm.
And during, I guess, in the 1700s, when 1760 something, 63 maybe, during the Beaver Wars.
Right. Yeah. That sounds familiar.
Right.
Okay.
People get really attitudes in Pennsylvania start to shift about the Indians, and they start to get really worried because they see other Indians who I'll give myself a little side eye and a wink, but they were Shawnees. But they see other Indians like raiding and doing that kind of activity, and they become worried about it, that there's going to be warring. So they get themselves all worked up into a frenzy, and these people called the Paxton Boys, who are basically a vigilante gang, they come down to Lancaster, and they murder the Conestogas. I think there were 23 still living in Conestoga Indian Town, and most of them, 20 of them had been held in the workhouse, which is underneath the Fulton Opera House.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of a jail, but they were holding them for protection.
Yeah.
So right after Christmas, in 1763, they came down and just marched right in with hundreds of dudes and killed all these men, women, and children, and walked out, and no one batted an eye.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say that's the thing is, like, man, I can't see any reason for that to ever happen, but it did, and it seems like just especially with Native history, there's so much of it that most of it's oral, and like there are a lot of people now within the internet age that are screaming we need proof and all this stuff, and it's like it seems to diminish the necessity for that kind of history when
right. Well, and the telling of history is not necessarily done by Native people. If you don't consider Native people to be humans, then thereby you don't consider their ideas and their recounting of your history to be beneficial or accurate. Yeah. So who's defining that authenticity of the story is a big key.
Yeah, I would have never. I was gonna say I wouldn't have made that consideration, honestly, because you're full Native.
Oh heck no. Oh heck no. All of my living family is white or identifies as white.
Really?
Yeah, my brother is like 100 shades darker than I am, but he'll tell you he's white all the time.
I was gonna say, I think I've seen your brother, and
it's an interesting thing that sort of being biracial will,
I was gonna say, I think I was gonna say with my era, it doesn't seem like that's even that big of a thing, big deal. But I think you're within my age range anyway. So it kind of seems like it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but maybe it's more of a deal because of the biraciality between Native and English.
Well, and for for us, and for me specifically, one of the like pivotal memories that I have is my parents and my grandparents telling me that when people ask if you're an Indian, just tell them you're dark complected. So that's how I went through a lot of my youth. And now looking back, the people who were in my young life who were asking me if I was Indian were other Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And the place where we live is not like we had Klan rallies over the hill from our house. It's not really the most racially diverse area.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of Indian families that live in that southern part of the county, and they were just working farms and just keeping their head down, doing their thing. And even now, I don't think that they identify as uniquely Indian. I don't think that they many of my relatives and those people that I talk to will tell me, "Oh yeah, we're Indians, but we don't really know anything about it." So if it's not something that's valued in your community, and the protection of it is valued more than the celebration of it, you can easily lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. I wouldn't say that there is a condensed or cohesive community of Indians there. There are people with Indian ancestry. So mine comes through my dad, and his father was not the man who raised him as his son, was not the man that's on his birth certificate. That's how I get the name Mcpherson.
Oh, okay.
Because my grandpa, Earl Mcpherson, was an exceptional human being and loved my grandmother and my dad, and, basically was like, okay, this is my son, and we're never going to talk about this again.
Wow.
This is how it is. So through my dad's side of the family, that's where my Shawnee comes from. Most of the rest of my family is Pennsylvania Dutch, and if you see what I'm doing, I identify heavily with that as well. Basically because of the influence of my grandmother, who was super Dutchy.
Yeah, she was. I was gonna say she made you chicken pot pie every time, from the start of October until the end of March, just to make sure that you made it through the winter.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that's.
We got our pork and sauerkraut. We're
No,
doing
yeah.
our thing.
Yeah. It's such an odd thing to like. That feels so odd to me, because when I think of Native heritage, which I have. I don't claim either way. I know that I do have some. Mm-hmm. I know that my grandmother was. She was, I think, born in the Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina, something like that. Okay. And it's some goofiness like that. But it seems odd that, everybody would force you to hold that down when Native culture is so about, doing traditionalism. It's such a traditionalist thing where you're taking all those traditions and you're passing them all down, canning. It's simple things from canning foods to right. the extravagance of powwows and all that.
Mm-hmm. And the things that I was learning, the things that I was being taught, I didn't know they were different than the things everyone else was being taught until I went away from here and learned that everyone else didn't have that knowledge or that thought process or that that sense of history or relationship to the environment or to creation.
Yeah.
So my mom took, who was white, took special care to learn from, elders and from old folks who were Pennsylvania Dutch and who were Indian and who were all kinds of things. But to pass that, the importance of that on to me as a kid, and that ability to understand the world in that way.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really great because, my family history on either side is just gone. It was always just a soup of crazies, and so there's not really anything there all that much. So and the importance of environment, the environment that you're in, not even like environmentalism as a whole. It's like, no, this is the place that you live, and you treat it nice so that next time everything works out well. Mm-hmm. And there's all that, almost a preparedness, just a rationale of making sure that everything's going to be good to go next time. It's really cool. It's really fascinating.
Well, and when you think about, when you begin to think about things in the way of being a good relative to them, it's completely different than like, well, let me just steward this land that is, inanimate. Like, they're all are. All of those things have a spirit. All of those things have a language. All of those things have teachings to give us, and they have relationships with us. And when you think about the place that you're from, not in a sort of Western sense of like we have to dominate this place, but when you think about it as we're cooperating with our family, it's an entirely different mode of existence.
No, I was gonna say that's a really good way to put it. I didn't quite wrap my head around that, and I think I'm terrified of saying all the wrong things and getting the worst face from you. Because
I'm a good side eye. I'll admit. So,
no, I'm just a modern dude, so I'm very cautious of that with you. Just because
I am not the expert on all things Indian. I mean, I have we come from a similar place, and I think we can have diverging points of view on it and understandings of it, and I think that's really valuable having a conversation about
and that's the other thing I was going to say was the way that you put the family of the entire everything around you, from the grass to the trees to the sky to the birds and all that. It seems like from any outsider's point of view that's what's going to that kind of quote unquote mysticness or the spirituality of that is what's going to be focused on, rather than, especially with like Twin Peaks being so focused on the Blackfoot and all those Oregon tribes, like, and all their mythos. It's like, okay, well, it's going to turn that into the paradigm, and that's what everybody's going to stick with,
right? Rather
than realizing that even now, when you see, like, I follow a bunch of I followed a couple of the Res Life guys, the guys that do YouTube videos that are they're Navajo, great kids. Yeah. It lends me an interesting perspective on the fact that no matter what, like, if somebody is willing to put their life up and say, hey, this is my heritage and this is what I believe, and I will sit here and deal through all these things, and we're going to take the mystical history over the fact that these people are standing in a line of, the last time I saw anything on the Navajo was the last job fair on the res.
Okay.
And it was a line of like 2,400 people trying to get 5 jobs.
Right.
And it's just like, the way that I feel about Native history is that everybody's taking the human side out of it. The fact that that Natives are indeed people, and it doesn't.
Right, and they have a different value system than Western people do.
Yeah.
And I say but with full knowledge that that's very dangerous to sort of blanket everybody as one culture. Everyone has there's so many tribes, way more than the 567 that are federally recognized. But everyone has a different culture, and they converge in places and they diverge in others. But yeah, it's very strange you always have to look at those sorts of things, understanding the lens that is viewing them, that's translating them for you. A lot of times when non-native people are looking at native people, they can't look at them in the way that we look at ourselves. They have to, and that's just how perspective works. They have to look at them through their own set of values and their own set of understanding. So it comes out looking like weird poverty porn, and look at these poor, destitute people, and isn't it horrible? And a lot of times it is horrible, and it is really, there are really disgusting and tragic conditions. But it's often looked at, I think, without that perspective, without the voice of Indian people.
Yeah.
In the conversation.
Well, I was going to say there was, just to make media, just to make a media reference of it, there was something on Netflix that was I think it was a show called Res Cops or something.
I think
Something like that. That one, I enjoyed that one because it did give you the interpersonal perspective without just being the 90s. You remember watching Cops when you were a kid, and you were just really excited that wasn't you on the TV. It wasn't. It wasn't quite that. But at the same,
your auntie or
yeah,
whatever.
it wasn't quite that. But it did open a lens to that because, as outsiders, it's kind of like if you don't have anything to do with Native life at all, when somebody says Native Americans, the only thought that's going to come to your head is casinos. That's it. It's like, and that's such a blanket generalization that you're like, okay, well, that show had some humanity to it, and then the guy who did Super Size Me, the documentary, Morgan Spurlock.
Yeah. Okay.
He did one where he came in. I think it was he came in for a week, I think, and he stayed in a yurt in the backyard and did. That one was so in depth into the daily life of what, not to focus on the Navajo, but they are really often in the news. But
Western tribes get a lot of attention.
I think that's because the Western tribes were so dense versus us being versus the Eastern Shore being, or Eastern, whatever, the Eastern half of the United States being so sparse, and our populations, the population centers with natives wasn't so internet.
We for sure had large populations here, but if you think about it, it's 200 years. Like they encountered colonists 200 years after we did. We had a long time to be decimated by all of that stuff. So it is different, and it's fresher. And one of the, I think, reasons that it's fresher is because we have readily available and accessible imagery to associate with it. We have photographs. We can, even if they're romanticized and completely false, we have photographs that we can look at and say, these are Indians, and that's what they look like. And we forget that, like, these, like, crappy drawings by some Dutch guy are also Indians, but,
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all because, I forget where it is. I have the time life set over there. It's all about the West. So, of course, the Western tribes are going to be more focused on because turn of the 1900s, everybody's moving west. Everybody's Kodak. You can take pictures, all that stuff.
Right,
The availability and the reality of it's there. And then Barnum doing the Wild West show, which is such a great thing.
I was listening to your podcast on gaffs, and it really reminded me of that turning point where we're in the Indian Wars, and it's the late 1800s, and we're in them, and then pretty much when Geronimo is finally, like, for the last time, like, okay, well, I can't do this anymore, and is quote unquote captured. The Indian Wars stop. That's sort of the end of it, and immediately America goes from fearing Indians and these savages to this romanticized idea of, oh, how noble they were, and what excellent fighters, and isn't it fantastic their quaint idea of relationship to the land and all of these things. So we have this idea of them as exotic, and we want to blow it way up because it makes us feel as Americans like really something that we have conquered this really worthwhile foe. And I totally forget where I was going with that point, but
I was you're right. I was gonna say that you derive that from the Gaff and P.T. Barnum's Wild West show, and
right. And just thinking about, I think, like, specifically in your podcast, you were talking about the lady from the Amazon, and like this, like how exotic it seems, and we wouldn't think about that today because information is accessible. We can Google it. We know people in the Amazon don't have snake bodies, and they don't,
Yeah.
And so we feel like more savvy, and we aren't as amazed by those things. But that's the same That's the same sort of idea. But we still hold all those thoughts about Indians. We still think that, everyone lives in a teepee and wears bonnets.
Yeah.
And things like, Hollywood portrayals and sports mascots and things like that perpetuate those ideas within our consciousness, and we don't necessarily give a real understanding to Indians as human beings a chance.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and that was my third thought on that was Alex Honnold. He's a free solo climber, and he's one of my heroes. Yeah, he's one of the people I look up to because he's just generally insane. But what he did a while ago was he did it was a short feature. He was climbing a bunch of desert towers without ropes and all that, and then it was a bike trip across into the res, and he was helping put electric lines in so that people that were living in so that some of the natives that were living in what looked like shambling drop trailers, like trailer homes, could finally have light at night.
Sure.
Yeah, and it gave that point of reality because we're only talking about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that all also plays into this idea of like the disdain that anybody that has to work for a living would have against, oh well, the government's giving you everything and they gave you your land and it's sacred and they're giving, and you've got
money.
you've got all this and you got your casinos and you can buy cigarettes tax free and you got it so good, and it's like that kernel of lies, that kernel of poor thinking sticks with people, and then it just grows and it grows, and it just takes all the it takes all the humanity out of the fact that somebody being born, whether they be half whatever percentage, it doesn't matter, to take that culture and just still say, well, those people weren't human, and look at them, they're here on the TV, look at them on the big screen, and it's just there's so much to it that's missing, and it seems like now the pot of media and personal conjecture and constancy just depletes every effort. Like we were talking about Standing Rock before we started recording. Like it seems like it doesn't matter who was showing up to Standing Rock. It was an important thing to stand up for. And then it suddenly became it suddenly dwindled into the same thing that Occupy Wall Street had, which was you look at the picture of the crowd and, oh, there's somebody wearing designer clothes and they're fighting for jobs. And it's like, well, this white guy just walked halfway across the country to stand with these people and save their native land. What a jackass. He doesn't even know. And it becomes that thing where it's like, not even native people are heralding the idea of native life as their thing. Like as their sole purpose and shield. Nobody else can do it because it's their thing. But like, you know what I mean?
I mean, a lot of times that and that's the danger in things like Standing Rock, that message gets co-opted and turned into something else. So whereas that issue at Standing Rock began as sort of a tribal sovereignty issue, these are their treaty lands. They are the tribal people. They're occupying it. Their directive is that it will always be peaceful, and they should be the people that are deferred to in all instances. I mean, it is their space. People come into it and it sort of morphs into this secondary cause of environmentalism and environmental protection. And that's important also. But then it sort of takes a turn and is no longer, I'll say there are a lot of allies who maybe were not open to hearing what the leaders of that movement and the tribal citizens had to say and what their points of view were. So when you come into this fight and you're saying, oh, well, I know better than you, that's where it gets changed. And as non-natives, there, as white people, I'll just say it, you have inherently a louder voice than we do as natives. People are not as willing to hear what we're saying and what our causes are. I think social media has really opened that up in a really interesting and great way. So I hope that people will begin to hear more about these causes. But also, as an Indian person, I know I'm hearing about them. My feed is filled with them. But like my best friend, who I refer to often as my little brother, like his feed is not.
Mm.
So I think that people hear all of these things. I think people are aware of like Oak Flats and missing and murdered Indigenous women and all of those issues. But really, that's just me. That stuff is curated for me. Only I'm hearing that. Nobody else is hearing it, which is scary.
Well, that's a weird thing that comes from the algorithm that everything on the internet morphs to you and your habits.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's important to you, that's always going to continue to be important to you. And no matter how many times you share it, if it's not important to somebody else, it's not going to fit into their math.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing, is that, awareness can go as far as it can, but where does the action start? Like that's my
Right.
biggest confusion, is that like I can be aware of a thing as much as I need.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am just to be, since this is going up next week anyway, but just to be pointed on this whole thing, like I'm well aware that the Klan exists. I'm well aware that the thought that the idea that people that have that kind of thought pattern just programmed in and that's all they're thinking, whether that's a generalization or not, the fact that thinking even exists today makes me sick to my stomach, and I cannot handle it. I can be aware of it all I want, and I can know that I stand against hate absolutely every minute of the day. But how do you enact that? How do you
Right.
how do you stand against somebody that's willing to kill for what they believe if you don't believe that violence is an answer?
Well, and I think that's that's a great question for like some Mennonites to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
If you've like, I had the honor of speaking for the Mennonite World Conference, and I'm not Mennonite, I'm not Christian, I'm none of that. But because of their history with Native people, they came here and they wanted to be respectful and talk to us in that way. But they're pacifists, and that's really, there are some times in their lives and in the history of their faith where they've really been tested, and how do you remain passive and in the face of all that, even when things are wrong, even when you see that there are wrongs being committed, how do you handle those as peaceful people? Just in terms of Pennsylvania history, I think that's an interesting an interesting way we can engage our community and talk about those things.
Yeah, that is an odd thing. It's like
I never thought I'd be talking about Mennonites on a podcast with you, by the way.
I no, that's fine. I don't know enough of them that well to even understand what the difference between a Mennonite, a Brethren, and an Amish. I do know the difference between the Amish is that I'm not a big fan of them. I'm way less a fan of them than I am of most other people.
Yeah, they can be.
There's no hate in there, but the way that they slaughter their animals bothers me to no end.
And that is a byproduct of that dominating the earth mentality of Western religions. Yeah. Yeah, it can be really gross. All three of them, though, are Anabaptist people and are all pacifists.
It's just, yeah, I was gonna say with the common disdain that anybody would feel towards natives is the same way I feel towards the Amish. Pay your taxes, you jerks.
Fair.
Yeah, no, but still, no, it just, yeah, that's not that is the odd thing, is that Sitting Bull was it Sitting Bull that decided not to fight and move to Canada?
Chief Joseph, are you thinking about that famous
I might be.
speech? I'll fight no more forever.
This was toward the timeline that I'm thinking of is during the Indian Act, when the Native Act was being put in early 1900s, and somebody was pushed out of their land, and
Like the Indian
it was
Relocation Act?
it was. Yeah, it was. I think so. But he absconded to Canada, and then he came back, and then he died.
I think that's Chief Joseph.
I think it might be. But
apologies to all my
Yeah.
Nez Perce friends if
I
I
was
got that
gonna
wrong,
say,
but I'm pretty sure.
I'm not trying to be I'm actually
Right.
the entire point of this is to open up the doors for people to look.
Yeah.
Because I want people to look into that.
Right.
When I was young in school, we went to the museum up in Harrisburg, the Natural History Museum, and they have models of the dugouts and the longhouses and all that stuff, and it got me curious. And then I found out the finger touches in the family, so I've always been curious.
Yeah. Well, and that stuff is those are initiatives that we're working on here in central Pennsylvania to be able to bring that awareness and that education to people. We're working. I'm a board member of a group called Circle Legacy Center based in Lancaster.
I was going to ask you about that.
And they're a Native American awareness and advocacy organization. They do a lot of different educational activities. Recently, we were in Carlisle for the repatriation of the Northern Arapaho remains, which is a really intense thing. But we also do every second Friday, we do a culture program, an educational event. We work with the Lancaster Longhouse to administer their program, make sure that they're erring on the side of authenticity and representation instead of just them telling our history as Mennonites. And that's where the correlation comes in there. We work with the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society. And in Washington Borough, with the Blue Rock Heritage Center, we are right now working on building a wigwam to the specifications of one that was excavated there. There are two really major sites, and if I try to name them after their archaeological founders, I will get them wrong. But one is a Shanks Ferry site, and one is a Susquehannock site, and they're very major villages. And they're sort of right across the river from the last known major Susquehannock site, which is in Long Level.
Oh, okay.
So down at the Zimmerman Center was recently opened up down there, and it's right above that, up on the hill.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know where you're at.
Yeah, you can see them from each other, when you look on the river. So we're doing a lot of things to make people recognize and understand our history here as Indian people, and that we still exist here as Indian people, which is important work, and it can be difficult, but it's one step at a time. We've done a lot of work around the Conestoga Massacre, and we've put up a historical marker near the Fulton. About that, we had a dedication and a reading of the names, which was really I think an amazing way to celebrate and remember those people that were killed there.
Yeah, no, that I think that so that brings me to another thought, which is, are you still working with Baltimore Lifelines?
I am. Native American Lifelines. We are an urban Indian health program contracted by the federal government under Title V of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. So we work we're contracted by the Indian Health Service to administer their trust responsibilities to American Indians and Alaska Natives in urban areas. As a part of negotiating treaties, our ancestors negotiated for certain provisions, and one of those is the provision of health care and the access to quality health care, which arguably is present in some areas and certainly much more difficult to achieve in other areas. But yeah, I'm still there. I'm their fiscal manager. I started there as a cultural educator, teaching arts, traditional skills and stuff like that to the youth in their culture program.
Oh wow, that's I had wondered because, of course, I totally forgot what I was thinking. I 100% forgot what I was thinking. Oh no, I didn't actually. So I was wondering that because so Native American Lifelines is dealing with Native life as it is happening. Yeah. And then in the same turn of it, you're still trying to educate people on the history. I feel like that's the shift that's hard to deal with, is that you're trying to educate people on what it was like versus and when you try to educate people on what it was like, you're still but it's still here and it's still going on and it's still current and we're still here. But hey, here's all the stuff that went ignored with a blind eye because of whatever. it seems like that's a very hard position to be in because I mean even through my mind I'd look at it from the historical perspective and I'm like, oh, okay, the history of it is this, and then I don't really consider the fact that like the other it must have been 11 or 12 months ago, so maybe a year ago. I met a man. He was 95. He was full-blooded Cherokee. He was a beautiful human being, by the way, for his age. As just as gorgeous as you could get. Right, 95,
Okay.
big, wide, strong shoulders. World War II vet.
Yeah.
Walked down from he walked down to the draft office in North Carolina from the res and said, I'll join up, and fought. He spent 3 years in Europe, and he just was there, and it was pretty rad. And you think about that, and you're like, oh well, think about all of his history, but then you consider, oh well, his web of heritage is still spreading out. Like every
Right.
moment, it's like how. Is there a logical point where you could say, all right, so we focused enough on this, we're going to move on to this, or is there like a point where you come to knowing how to deal with living versus history or living history, that kind of thing?
Too often, people have an inability to see us as contemporary human beings. As Indian people, they think of us in this bubble in the past, and that we're only our history, and that sort of exists in a weird vacuum for them.
Mm.
For us, that's our history, but it's also, we carry it in who we are. We carry all of those historical traumas with us, and a lot of times at Lifelines, that's what we're dealing with: historical traumas and intergenerational traumas that are, byproducts of our history as people. And for us as Indians, it's very important to remember that we are not only those things, we are resilient. We have all those. My friend Jillian Joseph referred to them once as that historical wisdom that accompanies those historical traumas. Those are the things that, keep us going. Those are the things that keep us strong, and that's how we're going to heal all that sort of damage that was done to us. But yeah, we're contemporary people with like all of those things that happened to us in the past are real things that we're still trying to get through. We're still trying to heal the idea of boarding schools like damaging our familial relationships and our ideas of parenting and our ideas about self-identity and the effects of missionaries, telling us that we're animals and not humans, and the only way that we can be good is to believe in this European deity. Like we're still we're still trying to get through being displaced, being torn out of our homelands, and being forced to live in an environment that we are unfamiliar with, and that our teachings don't support, that we have no basis to understand how to exist there. We're still trying to deal with all of those things, and we're still trying to deal with Hollywood depicting us all in this one way and taking our sacred items and turning them into jokes and mascots for sports teams and all of those things. So we're real people, just like everybody else. I think it's so often that's the case. People don't see us as contemporary and having contemporary lives, and one of the things that I struggle with, and in all of my roles as an existing Indian person, and as a person administering an urban Indian health program, a trauma-informed, culturally centered program, and as a person trying to teach non-natives about our history and our existence here now, those sort of three really separate things that are my identity that I have to reconcile. I just maybe sometimes like understanding the audience. I think we were talking about that before, but understanding the audience is maybe like the key to that. I have to often know, like, be able to navigate who I'm talking to and what it is that they need from me, and how I need to how I need to serve them as people, and then how I need to serve myself as an Indian person. But does any of that make sense?
No, it all does. It's just it all absolutely makes sense, and it is it is my perspective of like me just being a white dude. Like, I mean, everything that I have said in this, like, I feel stupid as soon as it comes out of my mouth, because like I the perspective that needs to be put on it for everybody. That's I I'm an incredibly well-read human being. I never would have considered it that way. You know, I never thought of that, because all this derives from, I remember you had posted something about doing an oral history thing with NAL a while back. And I thought about that, and I was like, oh, well, that is really cool. Oral history is important. And then I was like, and then the thought of, yeah, but current this is just the this is the fight between trying to understand that now is now and then is then, but we need to know both, and we need to be mindful of now versus
That's the key.
We need to be mindful of now and still take into account that, yeah, people are people, and just because you say the word native doesn't mean that that's anything separate from that person. Because I think that's the commonality, is that when you say Native American or Indian or you know, whatever term you use for it, whenever you say that term, you consider that the common brain would consider that as something completely different from that person that you're standing there talking to.
Right.
You know, you'd take that as, you'd take that cultural thing and say that's the thing, and then that, you know, you separate it. So you don't even really consider that.
There have been, I used to work with the general public. My first job was at a grocery store, and I worked there for like 12 years. It was a really awesome experience. It really taught me how to be a good human being and a good employee.
Yeah.
But every day I encountered someone who was telling me that I didn't exist, or someone who was telling me that I must be from Arizona, or someone who was telling me, no lie, one time a lady said to me, "How did your people get this far east?" I was dumbfounded. I wanted to,
that's,
you know, 30 seconds later, I wanted to be like, wait, I have a really good one. You know, like, I don't know, how did you get on the boat? But, like, you know, and I had a coworker even that was like, I never think of you as a Native American. That's not a compliment to me that you can't see who I am.
Yeah.
And that you think of it as something different. But so in our work with urban Indians at Lifelines, a lot of times what we're seeing is people who have been in those urban areas for generations, and their families are there for generations, and they the history of urban Indian centers like that comes about because of Indian relocation into urban centers to sort of get Indians off of the reservation, to sort of realot their lands, allow them to sell it so the government could get more land, and move them out into urban areas, so that then they assimilate into the larger American culture, and then there are less Indians to take care of.
Right.
So they move people out, and they're into industrial centers. So at that time in the 40s and 50s, there are, you know, after the war, there are a lot of jobs. There's lots of stuff to do. You know, so their families go and they're working, and then, you know, what happens when those jobs disappear? Then their families are still there, and they can't maybe afford to go back home. And they're there for generations in that sort of poverty trap and in that urban environment. And it's very hard when you're isolated to keep your identity, to keep your traditions, and to keep your ceremonies, to keep your history, to keep all that stuff, especially when you're in crisis for most of your life, when most of your existence is like trying to deal with, like, how am I going to put food on the table? You don't often have the ability to say, okay, kids, like, let's sit down and talk about where our ancestors are from and what we did and who we are as people and the things that we need to carry on. A lot of times you're just like, let me let me figure out how I'm going to make ends meet, or, in whatever way that takes shape.
Right.
So that sort of part of, losing your identity like that, being a part of the larger American culture and having it bear down on you so hard makes it very difficult to maintain, your understanding of where you come from and your connection to that. I think, though, for me, and the thing that I try to tell most people is that you have a duty to your ancestors to honor them by knowing who they are, by remembering who they are, and by resurrecting their teachings. If you've lost them, find them. They're somewhere. How are you going to do that? How are you going to begin to carry them forward? And not in the way that so many people are like, well, in 16 whatever we did this, and so I'm going to do it like that, and not in that sort of reenactory way, not in that sort of way where you're just mimicking a people and you're not understanding the thought process or the worldview behind why they're doing those things. I think as an artist, I try to think about that a lot. Like, how do those aesthetics and that understanding inform the work that I'm making? And my work, how do I keep it authentic to me as as an Indian woman living now in 2017, and not becoming a
caricature
that,
of
not
itself.
becoming that cliche and that, yeah, not sort of feeding that stereotype machine.
Yeah, that it is. Like, I was gonna say, honestly, I'm in the middle of an epigesis because I like this. It just doesn't. You don't really confront any ideas that you're not paying whether you're paying attention to ideas or not. Like, how many times have you driven through Jim Thorpe?
Right.
And you think, oh, well, he was a football player. And then you think,
right.
Well, at one point...
Who didn't ever live there, by the way.
Yeah, no. It was like, that's the one thing is like, okay, well, Jim Thorpe was taken into the Carlisle School and forced to learn a whole bunch of stuff he didn't need to learn, and then played a game. And then Pennsylvania was like, this is my honest hope, that the current governor at that time of Pennsylvania was like, that was real fucked up. Let's give him a town. Like, and they're like, oh yeah, well, like, here's your apology. Sorry, we took you from your world and made you a big star. And it's like that's the whole thing. It's the imbalance between understanding that Jim Thorpe himself was a person well before he went to the Carlisle School.
Right.
And that's Carlisle Indian School for anybody who isn't aware. But he was drugged in by missionaries to learn all their things and do all this, and then he was given stardom, and they think, the automatic thought is like, oh, well, you were a big thing, and they named a town after you, and that's so great for you. It's like, well, yeah,
right.
But,
you're the athlete of the millennium.
Yeah, but all that was me was taken.
Right.
And it is the blue collar Calvinistic thinking of, you've already got the world, why are you not happy?
Right.
It's like that, and that's obviously what that's where my programming comes from.
Right.
Like, it just, I'm.
Well, and how do you reconcile this idea that you are lauded as this amazing athlete and you're being celebrated for that, but you're also not being celebrated for the person you are, and you're very clearly being told that part of you, that original part of you, is not valued, and it holds no value or worth or future in this society, and that you have to squash it. You have to become this thing that you are not in order to be valued. And then those people who are asking you to become them, they only value you for this one thing and this sort of celebrity and stardom that you can bring to them.
Yeah, that I don't even know. I was gonna say, I put up that bonus episode in the middle of the night at whatever number 7 or whatever it was. I was really mad. I was really upset about the Carl Sagan thing that was getting passed around, because Carl Sagan predicted exactly what was gonna happen, and so I did a whole whatever 14-minute rant about it and put it up. And I messaged a friend of mine who listens to the show every day, and she's my best friend in the other than my wife. She is my best friend in the entire world. I know that's a weird thing for a dude to say. It's okay to not want to have sex with people. Like there's nothing wrong with it.
No, but my best friend is male, and I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. I wouldn't touch him with your pole.
That's fine. I don't mind either way. But anyway, I messaged her in the morning. She'd listen, or she'd texted me, and she said, "Oh, I listened to it." And I said, "Well, what do you think I should do with it?" And I said, because of the anxiety of people thinking that it's wrong of me to think that maybe I'll lose people because of it. And she's like, "If you believe it, if you think that, if that's your honest opinion, leave it up. Who cares?"
Yeah.
It's like. Yeah, and that's what, and that's exactly what that thinking, your thought line that was, you're only this big thing because the only people that it's affecting is us. The five handlers around you, you're making them rich because of your thing, and you're destroying you're throwing out any part of you for your quote unquote brand. Not like Jim Thorpe would have ever had any reason to use the word brand unless he was hitting the cheap, because was a while ago.
But I've never met Jim Thorpe.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Personally. I have met his family members, but
it just I was gonna say he makes a great example in Pennsylvania. He makes a great example because there are a lot of people that don't even know in our general vicinity, an hour away from Carlisle, who don't even know what the Indian school is.
Not a stitch of any idea, and it is this massive sprawling campus that's been there for. It's like centuries at this point.
Yeah.
And next year we'll celebrate the 100th anniversary of the closing of the school.
Wow.
And so many people they have no idea. They have no idea.
I was going to say, I didn't realize it was,
and the idea is exactly that of, the Army will tell you now, like, oh, kids wanted to come here. It was really great. They had a good time. But the premise, the entire reason that it began was, Colonel Pratt's famous quote of "Kill the Indian, save the man." Mm-hmm. The only way that you can survive in this country is to not be an Indian.
Yeah,
that's what he's telling us.
And I was gonna say, and then he's saying, forget everything that you are and be us.
Right.
It's like
because we're the thing. We're the desirable.
Yeah, assimilate to us.
The goal.
That I was gonna say. And for the fourth time, I am totally white. That is such an odd thing to come around, because you think no matter what's going on in the world, no matter how many anti-fascism protests and stuff you go to, you're thinking no matter what that everybody's an American or everybody's a person, and it automatically whitewashes the idea that Native life and American life are two different things. Yeah. Native American doesn't even make sense.
Right.
And that is all just old program. That's old programming. That's old thinking. Right. That stops most people from digging even further, and then giving off those cliches like, oh well, what do you care? You grew up in a house. What do you care? You're not Native, or you're not. Right. Why. Not like the music fest or anything, but you see a very pale girl in all of her powwow gear, and you're like, well, why are you doing this? And then you realize, like, okay, well, maybe her Indian parentage comes from her father's side, which is less dominant.
And you immediately discount her identity. My other best friend, who is not a male, she is very fair-skinned and white-passing, and that is... I think people immediately assign to people like that, like, oh, well, how much Indian are you really?
Yeah.
When honestly, like, that's not yours to question. That's for communities to question. That's hers to question. That's her identity. She gets to define that. No one else is the authority on your own identity other than you. Mm-hmm. And to look at someone's skin color like that, and in Baltimore that happens the other way frequently. A lot of our kids are mixed with African Americans, and so you're black. Well, no, I'm a member of this tribe, and that's the reality of it, and you don't get to define that for that person.
Okay. So that's another thing. I think it's down in my downstairs bookcase. But I have that book, Black Indians, and I picked it up from a store up in it was a tribal store up in Bar Harbor.
Okay.
I forget who they are. I forget all their history. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I don't know. My mind is a sieve.
So no, but I picked it up and I read through. Like, I picked it up. I looked at the title and I was like, Black Indians. What in the hell? So I read the summarization. It's like, after the English started bringing slaves in, a lot of them would run off and join Indians, like join Indian culture and mix, and it wasn't a thing. And it's like, so I read the book and. Oh, I wouldn't have thought of that either. You think of...
And then people also owned slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not gloss over that.
Yeah, no, that's not cool.
I mean, recently in current events, the Cherokee freedmen, there was a big controversy over that because the Cherokee tribe doesn't consider them Indians, and they have been with the tribe for so long, they consider that they are.
Wait, go and tell me more about that.
Oh, dude, you gotta get out the Google.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say there
are a group of people who were Cherokee slaves. They were African Americans, and they lived with the Cherokees. They were removed with them. They were considered a part of their tribe for so long. They're always referred to as freedmen, and and forgive me if I'm wrong, Cherokees. Or Cherokee freedmen. I don't think that they were ever referred to as solely just Cherokees. But it's a big question mark to sort of question their identity as the authenticity of their Indianness. They being not Indian. I think after that many years of living in the community, I'm certainly sure there's admixture of Indian and African American in there. But, this sort of goes to the question of, Native American DNA and who, you can't, I'm just going to stop that idea right there. Like, you can't do that. No DNA test is going to tell you you're a member of the Cherokee Nation or whatever. Yeah. And it also attacks our ability to define our own citizenship, our own citizenry, our own ideas of kinship and family. And who gets to, certainly the non-white or non-native culture shouldn't be defining who natives consider their membership or who native consider their family.
Right. But I was gonna interject. The only thought that they would feel obligated to have any business in that is that they still are stuck on that whole "we're paying you to be alive" thing. You know what I mean? It's like that. I think that's the only clash that would ever even be brought up in that kind of situation, because not myself personally, but that's the way the thinking is. If you're supported by the government, then everybody has a say in it because you're part of the, you're
right.
That's where my tax money is going, blah blah blah, and whatever, and all that goofy nonsense. But but that's still its own misnomer, because there's, you're right, there is no business in that. That's like saying, that's like having 12 people at a party and all 12 people saying it was a great party, and then the person who wasn't even at the party saying, well, it wasn't a really great party and it was terrible, and it's like, you weren't there, dude.
Right.
You weren't part of this, and it's okay that you're not part of this. And then when you that falls further down the goofy rabbit hole of, I believe in togetherness. I believe in coexistence, but everything falls further down that rabbit hole of vehement acceptance of everything for everyone. And it's like, I'm gonna say I'm a thing, and then I have to accept that you are. And it's like, we don't need to talk to each other. You know what I mean?
Right. You don't, everything doesn't have to be for you. You should certainly acknowledge that things outside you and your belief system exist. They don't have to be your beliefs or your things.
Yeah, and everything falls into that, it's the imbalance of people looking at natives as outsiders, and then people now trying to defeat the idea of outsiders because we're all together, et cetera, et cetera. And then like it's its own little fight, and it's nonsense. I don't know. It's weird.
So yeah. So sort of two things, and I'll probably forget the second one, but I'm sorry.
Okay.
First thing, I encourage anyone who is listening to you, and I encourage you and anyone who may be interested to investigate these things that I'm talking about further, because I'm not the expert on all of them. And I will certainly, give you a broad overview of things as I understand them, but look further. Go find some Cherokee freedmen descendants and ask them about their experience. What is it from their point of view? Just look harder, look deeper.
Yeah.
If it's interesting to you, and I think as humans, and as certainly as people in Pennsylvania, our history should be interesting to all of us. Look at it more, because I'll be the first person to say, like, I might be wrong.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and my knowledge comes as base as it gets. But yeah, you're right. It's just stop working off the assignation that that's enough, or the assumption that that's enough, and let it go. It's like, well, no. If it lights your fire, go for it. Go dig. There is a lot out there, and it is something that it's not like there's not like World War II history is one of my favorite topics. It's because I'm an old man on the inside, and
I understand that pain.
But the amount of veterans that we have left are dwindling down to like 150 or less, and so there is that like necessity to go out and track those people down and get it as soon as you can, and just don't assume, because there are still large pockets of natives here in the United States that there's no like that it's okay to just keep pushing it off. If you're really interested in helping out, or like if you're really interested in what's going on in reservations, dig into it, check it out, and if you can do a thing, lend a hand, do it. It's like, don't let the idea that it's going to stay there. It's going to still be there. Like, if we don't do anything about it, it does. The immediacy isn't as pressing, but the immediacy is still there. Get into it and do it.
Right. Well, and that's where we talked earlier about, when I was a kid, how it was sort of like not like, don't talk about being an Indian. Just don't. Just go about your business being, a Red Line High kid, whatever. Yeah. And it, like, that's why that never sat with me in a good way. So that's why it's so important to me now to be telling truth, and to be informing people, and to be working for the people, and to be bringing people together in a way that we didn't have an opportunity to a generation ago or 2 generations ago. I think firmly that we live in a different time, and we can make those changes. We should grow as people. We should grow as a nation. We should grow as individuals, and into the things that we want to be.
Yeah. And the opportunity is there. This isn't something that's hard to get to. This isn't something that's hard to dig into. There is a powwow coming up mid-September, right?
Sure. There'll be a festival down at Indian Steps Museum.
That's right. Okay.
Some folks from the local Native community are working in conjunction with the new administration at the museum to put that on. Did the museum go from private to public, or privately owned to publicly owned, or did it just switch? I think it just has a different staff. There's a different leadership and different folks. They're trying to do things in a different way, and I would argue honestly with you that I think some of it is problematic, but some of it is with a good heart.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the seances and all that stuff that they're doing there that are
What?
sort of yeah.
I'm sorry.
There's like they have like a psychic medium or something that they're having come recently, and they're doing like a medicine bag workshop, and I don't know that those are things that help our current situation. It doesn't help us as Indians to be associated with that like weird mystic kind of.
Yeah, it kind of adds. It kind of adds the extra step of farce to something like to that. That's kind of silly. Like I'm sure I'm interested in that kind of stuff, but there's a place and a time for it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna. What I just recently broke my heel and ankle last time I was at the Ferry Fest. Yeah, I fell off a cliff once. It was fun. But no, the first time I went to the Ferry Fest, I had a bad time at the Ferry Fest because it was raining and the metal that's my leg is made out of hurt, like desperately hurt. But it's like, okay, all that kind of stuff, all that spiritualism, all that fun stuff, that's a great place for that. But when it comes to a place where
be clearly designated as fantasy or like just fun or whatever.
It's just it's more of a right environment for that kind of thing. Like it just that
muddying the water between history and this metaphysical sort of stuff is I don't know.
I was gonna say that all goes back to the beginning of the conversation with the mystical history of natives versus the actual you walk in there, it's a beautiful home started by a really kooky lawyer and he just collected native artifacts and
full of really cool
really neat history and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's cool in its own, and the petroglyphs are just down the river fork from there,
right, which is a super sacred place, and is a place where it is very old, and we have the highest the concentration of petroglyphs this side of the Mississippi in the lower Susquehanna.
I didn't know that.
There's a reason for that. I mean, it's a very important place, and they're directing us and reminders to some very old teachings.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I didn't realize we had the highest concentration, but
we do.
We're right on a very large water source. So I mean, there's plenty of reason to be here.
Sure, and it was a major thoroughfare.
Now,
So like the second thing that I was gonna say when I thought I would forget it. Is that this idea that people have that Native Americans, they're the first Americans, is not, like we're so much older than that. We're so much older than that, and that's something that shouldn't be glossed over. We're not the first Americans. It wasn't America. It was so many other things. It was so many other places.
That I was gonna say everybody's coming from that shade of American life over everything else. Like the idea that American life is the same thing for everybody.
Right.
But with natives, with people, I saw somebody say something stupid the other day. They asked a guy in, it was like Britain or something. They asked him what it was like to be African American. He was never here.
Right.
Like, and it just that whole idea of, like America's the center of, American life is the center of everything and that spreads out to everything. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, you go back, a couple thousand years, there were still people here and it wasn't, you're right. It was just, it was a swampland on the outside and it was nice on the inside. It's there's so much there and we just idly gloss it over because of terminology or programming or thought processes that could pretty easily be broken. We're just not ever told to break them.
Right. We're not. I think that's the sort of point I'm driving at is you can be well intentioned and still uninformed. Inform yourself.
Yeah.
Really, understand the people and the things that live around you. Understand their history.
Yeah, and it's easy to get involved with people. It's easy to get involved with digging into that stuff or digging into what your neighbors are up to. We're talking about your neighbors. It's like, okay, we'll go out and be more social. Go,
Right. How do you even be a good neighbor, right?
Yeah, it's like go out and be more interested in people in real life. You know, I like that's the thing is this is my digital platform. This is my digital high horse. I can't stand internet culture. You know, it's like it doesn't make any sense to me that I'd of course do an internet show or whatever. It's like I don't like the internet anymore. It's not fun because people are just mean and hateful. It's like I just my biggest curiosities in life lead me outside. They lead me to shaking hands with a stranger and trying to understand what's going on. You know, it's like
Sure.
and it's not and you know.
So how do you see that? How do you begin to see that internet as not a place where you wanted to be before and are sort of disenchanted with, but how do you see it as a tool to show people that these are the really interesting things that are happening? The only interesting stuff is not the stuff that's happening online. There's real stuff that you don't know about.
Yeah. Well, that was the entire focus of this because like you do beadwork and fine art. You were trained in fine art.
Absolutely.
I've seen all your jewelry. It's beautiful.
Thank you for recognizing that.
But people just wouldn't know about that.
Yeah.
You know, no matter how many times you go and hit the share button or go and do whatever, you know, it's like there's a very specific process and there's a very specific set of hashtags and algorithms and all this goofy stuff. And it's like, look, if you come here, you're gonna learn all about Jess and you're gonna learn about her love and passion for her heritage, which is more important than any of the dumb shit that's come out of my head so far today. And
You're doing great.
Pardon my language, but you know, it's like it's so much easier. It's so much easier now to be led down a new path with the carrot and the stick of whatever the topic be or whatever the shared video be. It's like, we'll come here on Sunday and now Sunday nights and grab a new episode and learn about somebody new. It's an art, you know, it's an artist, it's a professor, it's whoever.
Right.
You know, I think that's whether it be myopic in scope, whether it be short-sighted in scope, where you know you're coming here and you learn about a person and that's all, you know, that's as far as it goes. I don't think there's enough. I don't think the people that I've had on fall into the modern business marketing schemes that would get them the notoriety that they deserve. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's so much fun stuff. There's so much fun stuff going on everywhere, and then they find a way to put it into a beautiful brochure and hand you a brochure as you're
Right.
walking past to go get your artisanal waffles, and
Right.
and then suddenly you're interested in that because all your friends are interested in that. But we know you're different than that, so that's why I do this.
Yeah.
It's just
That sort of having to package yourself is an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
But I love that idea, and even in my fine art, I think is something that I've always been really excited about. That if you are willing to look further, if you're willing to sort of get up close to something, that you can be rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And I love that idea. I love that, you know, if you're willing to take a minute and listen to this podcast with people that you don't know,
Yeah.
you know, maybe you'll know something that you didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you started.
And I was gonna say nine times out of 10, apart from my wife, who I live with, most of the people that I've had on so far are strangers.
That's
Like
cool.
it's just
That's
pure.
really terrifying, but
It's
all right.
pure. Hey, come on, come on over. We're gonna see if we met in real life.
Yeah.
Like I'm a social coffee drinker. So like I'm the weirdo at the bar drinking coffee. But
No,
if,
me too. I'm
it-
drinking Diet Cokes.
Yeah, if we met at at a bar or wherever, and I sat down and I talked to you, we're gonna talk about weird stuff for 3 hours. It's gonna be our first interaction. Why not just put it on here? But you and I have known each other for quite a while.
Yeah.
And we do have that we met at the Scarbox Guitar Festival 3 years ago.
No, dude,
wow.
way longer than
that was a long time ago. That was when the Hamiltons first came to.
It was probably the second year of the Cigar Box Guitar Festival. Were we in the seventh one now?
We're in the seventh. Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah, that was the. That was the year Katie and I got married. So the year that I got married, I met Al Hamilton, and he came down. That was before Heather, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. and he came down because he told me to come to the festival, and I bought a guitar from him, and I went, and then I met you.
Yeah, and I was there making jewelry and selling that stuff. It was in the period between full-time employment where I was like a full-time artist, and it felt like 5 or 6 jobs at one time, but it was awesome and fulfilling and exhausting all at the same time. But I met you, and we were talking about something. We were talking about Indian stuff, I think.
And
you're like, "Hi, my name is John Smith," and I was like, "Shut the f up."
I know. I was gonna say I hate that so much. It's like, look, man.
I thought you were messing with me for real.
I totally get the
not
joke.
Funny, man.
Like everybody made that joke. I get it. Yes.
How many Indians do you meet, and you have to tell them your name's John Smith?
Yeah, I actually don't meet that many. Believe it or not,
You're
I
lucky,
meet more Canadians in my regular work week than I do natives.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's just kind of a thing like that because they're not up no. Well, I deal with Bellefonte and Bradford, and both of those towns, if there are any natives still living there, they're probably hiding out in the mountains doing their own thing. Because I would too. Up there, I love northern Pennsylvania to death. It's quote unquote God's country. Sure, when the sun sets, it is really pretty.
Yeah. I think they still have laws on the books that are like raiding party laws, where you can only three Indians in a place together at a time.
I wouldn't be surprised. That place is a little kooky. They don't have cell reception. It's 2017, and I hit spots where I can't make phone calls. That's not good. That's not a place I want to be every day. But I am. So. But no, the other thing I was gonna say, back when we met, weren't you were a caretaker for your grandmother as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
That's rough.
My grandmother, my aunt and uncle and I sort of shared duties, taking care of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that's. I saw a billboard the other day that was caretaking is, I forget what the quote was. I forget what the tagline was, but it really was poignant. It's like. You're right next to a superhero if you can deal with that, because that's what Katie did that for an aging relative for a while, and that is, it's rough.
It's so hard, and it's hard to. I had parents that got ill when I was young, and I had to sort of be there for them while they were sick, and still trying to maintain that. Respect and dignity for them, and that in their identity as your parent or your grandparent, and as a human being, is really, I'll say that was my focus. And especially working with my grandma, I wanted always to sort of reinforce her identity for her, and understand that in a way that I think sometimes other people in my family couldn't see, because maybe she wasn't showing them, but that she knew what was happening to her, and it was very frustrating to her. But she didn't want to tell people. Yeah.
No, nobody. There is something about the human spirit that no matter how weak we feel, or no matter how hurt we are, just don't want to open our mouths about it.
Oh yeah,
it's one of those things.
It's a Pennsylvania thing for sure.
Yeah,
like I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say the only time I ever admitted weakness was when I fell off that cliff. I just sat there. It was Falling Branch or Rock State Park down in Maryland.
Okay.
I fell off the side of the waterfall, and no, I just sat in the creek. I was freezing to death, and I was just like, okay, I'm done with this. Yeah. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there, and then. But yeah, that is one of those. That's the virility of humanity. No matter what. Like, yeah, if you got your leg missing, you're gonna tie it off and you're gonna keep going. Like, people are just that way.
Yeah.
Especially.
I'll walk it off.
Not even just specialized on physical pain, emotional pain. People are just gonna keep on going.
Yeah.
Their personal resiliency will always outweigh their need to just ask for help.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of how it goes. So my only other thought was, you're really beautiful, and you're not wearing a wedding ring yet. And I remember a while ago, I wanted to know this. Is it more important for you to find somebody that is a native to marry, or is not?
Oh wow, that's a great question. That's a really personal.
I know it is, and I feel weird asking it.
For me, it is. I would rather like the thing that I want most is to feel understood.
Mm.
And someone who has lived a similar experience like that, another Native person can understand that in a way that a non-Native person can't. And I don't always want to have to be explaining nativeness or my experience of that or my identity in that way. I don't always want to be an other.
Mm.
And so that's really important to me. I mean, I've certainly dated non-native people.
Mm.
Generally I err towards Native men, but
I gotcha.
yeah. That's
No,
the way.
I was always curious about that because I didn't know what value pushed you to that. Because indeed you are very pretty, and I've just always been surprised.
Well, just tell all those dudes that they are missing out. I don't know.
They are. I was gonna say, or maybe it's just situational. You probably have a better choice in other pockets of the world, but more choice.
Yeah, I grew up in an area where I was very white, and I'm not. To be frank, just biologically, I'm not attracted to white men.
I gotcha.
I'm not. So it was easier for me to not date those dudes.
Yeah. I totally get that. I had simply always wondered.
Also, growing up in that kind of environment, if I always felt very when I look at myself in photographs with my friends, like my face is really wide and I just look completely different than they do. And if those are the things that are considered standards of beauty, I don't have them. In all honesty, I was probably like in my early 30s until someone said to me, until an Indian man said to me, "You are a beautiful Native woman," before I ever believed it.
Yeah.
Which is tragic, and it is a byproduct of where we live.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that's all your own personal history that plays into that. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's one of those odd subjects to end on, but it is in itself, like, I mean, I just wondered if it was a heritage thing over just personal taste, or if it was just anything like that.
It's part biology and part heritage, part choice, part all of that. I have no children, and that is a conscious decision that I wouldn't have children with anyone other than a Native person. And just because that is, we're disappearing, and I don't want that. I want people to understand our history. And that may never be something that I do, but I'll always have at least worked to teach people about it.
That's cool. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I
like that. And I was going to say, you could totally make some very strong-jawed, handsome Native man your war bride. Because I feel like no matter what, you'd totally be the alpha. You are just, I feel like you're just a take no shit, get it done kind of gal.
Yeah, I might be a strong personality like that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. So, did I miss anything?
So to wrap back around, there are some things in terms of history that I would love to share with you. Just really, really briefly, that sort of, we were talking earlier about that differentiation between Susquehannock Indians and Susquehanna Indians. And I think that plays an important role in our history, especially here in York County. It's a weird segue to go from that back into this. But
yeah, no, go ahead.
What we were talking about, the Conestogas and their time here. So during that time when the Conestogas are here and they're peaceful people and they're trading their baskets and working on farms, it becomes important to the Iroquois people not to have too much more encroachment by the British coming up from Maryland and coming up from down south. So they start bringing in other allies. And Shawnee people, which is sort of how I get to be here, at least in terms of the way that it's been told to me and the way that I understand it, the Conestoga people and the Shawnee people, Conestogas sort of sponsored us to come to Pennsylvania, and they said basically to William Penn, like, no, they're good. They'll be fine. We're saying like they're not going to harm anybody. They'll live peacefully here. So we came to be on the lower Susquehanna. That that worked out okay, and that was probably around 1680s, early 16, in between the 80s and 90s and the 1600s. So by like 1701, the Shawnees and the Conestoga signed the first treaty that signed with Shawnee people anywhere, with William Penn, that everything west of the Susquehanna River down along the Blue Mountain and down to the Potomac River, it is Shawnee and Conestoga treaty land. That's treated hunting territory. And historically, it had been shared territory among a bunch of Chesapeake tribes and Conestoga people. It had always been hunting land. So, like down in southern York County, you can find there's not a lot of it's a lot of no-till farming now. But when people used to be plowing their fields, you could walk through fields and kick up arrowheads like crazy. And that's because of hunting methods and creating sort of that controlled burn method of keeping keeping all of the forest sort of like edge and fresh plant life, so that game goes there, and then it's easy to hunt, and there's an abundance of game there. But so this becomes like where we're sitting right now, the first Shawnee and Conestoga treaty lands, and eventually people start pushing, and most Shawnees are like, what are you doing? We're out. So they go across the mountain and, across the Blue Mountain on to the other side of the Appalachians, which is Shawnee homelands, the Ohio River Valley, like Western PA, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia. And they say to the colonists, like, we're going over here. And the colonists say, like, okay, we won't follow you. And then, like, they turn around and they're like, what are you doing right there? Because you just said you were going to stay on the other side of the mountain. And they're like, yeah, well, whatever. So most Shawnees leave, and it sort of that treaty is sort of, I guess, abandoned. Certainly because people are also settling then on this side of the river. And when does York come into existence? 1730 something.
Oh, yes. I think it was 1728 or 1732, something like that.
Yeah. So then there's already a major settlement in these treaty lands. So they leave. And when people begin having trouble with other Indians again, they Pennsylvania invites the Shawnees back, and they want to give them a reservation up around Harrisburg, like across the river from Harrisburg. And Shawnees are like, no. So, and then, they're still out there in the Ohio River Valley, and sort of the rest is history, like Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa and War of 1812, and then removal, and how the Shawnees relate to America and the Civil War. That has a lot to do with the identities of the federally recognized Shawnee tribes and that stuff. It's very interesting to be a descendant who is not one of those tribal members is interesting, because they have almost a doctrine to eradicate anyone claiming to be like Lenape or Shawnee or any other tribes that are claiming to lay claim to that history, which is troubling. But I guess in terms of your federal benefits, you're taught really to guard them like someone else is coming after your piece of the pie.
Yeah,
which is weird.
Well, I was gonna say this is a difficult thought to get through, which is there was just an enactment maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I can't remember. It was something that was going to affect the Navajo again, because
I see.
For whatever.
It's like that.
Yeah. So it was some kind of payment, and there was like a meme going around, and it was just sitting around waiting for that whatever this bill check is to come in. But
Eco Bell check.
yeah, what I forget what I can't remember right now. But either way, this when you deal with that idea that there are, like there's a pure like a puritanical thought process towards guarding benefits. First, like, do you on a more spiritual level? Do you feel like that kind of thinking detracts from any, again, outsider? Just promise I'm an outsider. Do you feel like that kind of like thinking detracts from the warriorship of native kind? Like the vehemence to keep people out and be exclusionary to make sure that your thing is safe.
I understand the idea and the principle of like maintaining your sovereignty. I think that, and especially working with urban Indians, it's really relevant. I think that it's easy to sort of cut off your nose to spite your face. You want to maintain your sovereignty, but you don't want to care for your tribal members or your tribal citizens or your relatives who you maybe no longer consider tribal citizens. You don't want to care for them outside of the boundaries that the government has set up for you.
Right.
And it's such a complicated issue.
Because, well, I was going to say, with all those being, with all the treaties and everything that's gone into that, let's just generalize turn of the 1900s. I could see that as being, we have our foothold has matured. Don't slip off. Let's not take a step off. And they fight to keep that foundation. I'm just, as an outsider, I'm curious about that. It's like, I can see the need to be exclusionary, but then I could see but as an outsider that loves history, I could see the want for you to just let people in and talk more and do your thing so that we all could understand more, right. But I just,
well, and that works in several ways. In some ways, it, the method that some tribes use to sort of approach maintaining their culture, maintaining their languages, maintaining their teachings is to be very open and to really teach people about that so that it doesn't disappear. And then some tribes, in order to sort of safeguard their identity and maintain their sovereignty, like hold it very close, and it's very insular. And you have to question, I understand why they do it, but you also have to ask yourself, I think, as those nations, like, what happens if the people that we are willing to give this knowledge to don't want it, and they don't keep it, and they don't have anyone to share it with, because this is the reality of how we live. It disappears. And do you want it to disappear, or do you want it to flourish? So, and it can, I would argue, it can go really horribly either way. You can have everyone on Earth, in Russia and Germany and everywhere on the planet, in the South and everywhere, thinking they're Lakotas. Because they know some Lakota words, and they know Inipi, and they know this stuff, they know the medicine wheel, whatever. Or you can, you can have no one identifying as your tribe.
Right.
You can have no one, even people who are real descendants of your tribe, be excluded from that. And you can dwindle, and you can disappear, and you can assimilate the way that the government wants you to. So you can either sort of play into their hand or, not. And none of them are easy choices. They're all really complicated choices. I think that serving urban Indians is interesting, because we get to serve not only members of federally recognized tribes, we get to serve their unenrolled descendants. We get to serve, they have to have documentation, but we get to serve their unenrolled descendants. We get to serve members of state recognized tribes and their descendants. And so that allows us to see and define Indianness in a broader way than maybe only people who are trying to protect their relationship with the federal government can do. So as urban Indians, it's a much different sort of identity. And then some of the work that we do is trying to like bolster people's ideas of their history and their knowledge of their culture and their traditions in that way to keep them healthy, because those things are part of what make you a strong person. I think that connecting yourselves, like I said earlier, you have like an obligation to honor your ancestors by knowing who they are, and connecting yourselves to your ancestors like that allows you to be strong. It allows you to see that they were strong enough to make sure you were here, and it allows you to feel that strength too, that you have that kind of longevity in your experience. And as an Indian woman in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania only within the last 7 years, I think in 2010, recognized that Indians live in the state and contribute to its culture. Which is, yeah, you're making that face, and that's the correct face. That's the one they want to make. It's absurd. It's absurd. But so then, as an Indian person, like, what are the next steps? What are the next steps that we take to, to ensure that Indians living in Pennsylvania have the things that they need, have the resources that are guaranteed to them, or have the support that they need to live as Indians, as human beings in a place that so recently has not acknowledged their existence.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't realize. I was gonna say I didn't realize it took so long for the state to recognize that, because it's not like the Delaware were all on the Jersey side.
Right. Well, and so those displaced people that I was talking to you about before, those treaty Indians, when you're reading Pennsylvania history and you see like Susquehanna Indians, that multi-ethnic group, they're Delaware Indians, Lenapes, they're Conestogas, they're Conoys, or what we know now as Piscataways, who live in southern Maryland. They're Nanticokes from Delaware and the Eastern Shore. And they're sometimes even like Senecas, and they're definitely Shawnees. So all of those people are mixed in there. So no, they certainly weren't only over there on the Delaware River doing their thing. People are moving. History is not stagnant like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say, and Pennsylvania history is moving on from getting... It's kind of like it had that giant stub toe with all our steel cities, like all our industry cities. Once they failed, like everybody act like... I feel like history here in Pennsylvania had a sore toe over that, and they were trying to get through that, and like nothing else was being recognized or paid attention to, because we were trying to figure out why U.S. steel isn't made here anymore and all that stuff. It's like the other stuff was going on. It's like we had that hiccup, and then now we can get on to other stuff. But I still can't. My eyes widened because we have Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, we have the Carlisle School. Like, that's just silly. To me, for the state to not recognize that beforehand,
right?
It just,
and it's been, Pennsylvania has been so crucial in sort of in Indian history, and a very different colonially than other colonies. Had a very different relationship, and not in a way that stuff is good, in a way it's still horrible and tragic and traumatizing, but. To be so bold as to think there aren't Indians living here. Just because, like in the 60s, you moved the Senecas off of the Corn Planter Reservation and flooded it for the Kinsua Project doesn't really mean that Indians stopped living in the rest of our massive, massive, gigantic state.
Yeah. No. Right. That's crazy.
And that they don't, that you shouldn't offer them the rights and protections that they deserve.
Yeah, you can't. That all falls into just, you can't erase things. You can't you know, you can't erase things, especially on a bureaucratic level, because once you try to do that, that's what everybody comes out of the woodwork and says, "Hey, here's the documents. Here's everything. You know, here's 1,000 years worth of written history."
Yeah, yeah. So one of the reasons that I identify as a Susquehanna Indian is because of that understanding that, not that I think anyone in Pennsylvania will ever have recognition, but it's certainly something that we work towards. You know, as a Circle Legacy and as other individual Indians, it's certainly something we work towards. But Susquehanna Indians, like I said, are the treaty Indians in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
When you see treaties, when you read them, they are written, you know, with us, and you have to understand what that means and the nuance that differentiates Susquehanna Indians from Susquehannocks, from that sort of prehistoric Indian culture in Pennsylvania, from, you know, prehistoric as relative to Europeans.
Yeah.
You know, those are the things that we have to begin to educate people on if we ever intend to move forward. And for me, that I'm just starting to sort of formulate that idea. I want to talk to people in my community and my relatives and know, is it important to them that they're Indians? You know, and is this the next step that they want? And how can we go about that? And what are the things that they desire as Indian people and as citizens of this Commonwealth?
Mm.
I'm certainly not like a politician. I'm really tactless sometimes, but
Yeah.
but you know, so those are the things I'm thinking about, and along those lines where you were talking about, you know, we have to begin to talk to those people from you know, World War II, that because that is disappearing rapidly. People that understand and know our history in Southern. I love your dog. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, that's a goose. That's my dog Goose.
You know, people that know about our history as Indian people, especially in Southern York County, where I'm very interested because that's where my family is from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're disappearing. They're dying.
Yeah.
And you know, my father it passed away at a young age, and you know, it's complex and humanly difficult to approach other people just because of, you know, my family history, and because, you know, the person that raised my dad was not his biological father, and you know, the weird secrecy that goes along with that. But I think hopefully 2 generations later we should be past, but just sort of being delicate with people's feelings and understanding how to ask those questions in the right way sometimes escapes me, but I feel it, you know, getting a little bit closer, and hopefully soon, because like I said, the generation of people that know and identify that way are disappearing.
Yeah. No, I absolutely, and it just, yeah, you're right. It is very hard to converse with people about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's tough, but it does come after. You know, try it once, and if it doesn't go well, try it different the next time.
Yeah.
You know, you'll get it. But it absolutely is important, and you know, if that was another thought I was gonna say, is it you know, oral history is very important, to the point where I forget what NPR does. There's a giant project that they do where they take the recording booth around and people give their story.
Yeah.
I forget what it's called. But you guys should do one of those, do an event for that, you know, just set up a little box, looks like a photo booth, walk in, $75 worth of digital recorder, and have people talk for as long as they want.
Yeah.
So that because, you know, those small bits will lead up to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You know, even, you know, take it to we'll talk about this off air, because I think I have a good idea for you, and I'd like
awesome.
to.
It's something that we talk about frequently in Baltimore with our Lumbee community and the people that we serve there at Lifelines. That they're saying, you know, they've been there for a few generations, and they maybe haven't, the young people haven't been to Carolina, or they don't know what kind of life that their family members lived there, And we often talk about it in terms of that, like, let's just record those stories about being Lumbee from Carolina and those people before they are gone. But yeah, how can I do that in my own community is something I want to look at.
Yeah, and I was gonna say there are super easy ways to get into doing that, and it is trying to get people to break that barrier of sitting down and talking about it.
Yeah.
But that does come. Like when I first started this, people wouldn't even respond to the messages. Hey, come on and tell me. Come on and let's talk about how radical I think you are. It's like, look, I really like you as a person. Just come on and hang out.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Just do it. It's fun. But yeah, to do that, like, I was just to continue on that topic for half a second. Isle de Jean Saint Luc. I forget what it's a little island off of in the Gulf, and it is going to be the first island to be underwater due to global warming.
Oh.
It's also the home. Excuse me. Apart from being a tourist center, it is also the home of a New Louisiana tribe.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the tribe, but yeah, that's the importance of that. Is that you take the time. The time is the biggest investment. Mm-hmm. You take the time and you go and you talk to them and you say, hey, there's a big thing. There's a big bill being put in to make sure that the tribe that's there, they're on their own land, it's protected lands, mm-hmm. but they need to be moved. They're the first eco refugees in American history,
right? Which
is insane to think about. It's really crazy to think about. But they're going to be moved and all that. But it's like, hey, let's get your history while we're here. Take 2 weeks. Let's all talk about it. Sit down, and tell me about this place. And keep it, because even if they're moved and they still keep that heritage, it's like, this island is still here. Yeah. Let's get it before it becomes part of the bay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But yeah. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
No, I mean, I don't think so.
Are you sure?
Okay. I think that's a really, I'm very excited to have arrived at a point in our conversation where I feel like there's an open-endedness to it. Like there's like some kind of hope for or wonder about what the future of Indians in our area can be.
Yeah.
I so thank you for
that. I fully agree, and I think it's really awesome, and I think there is so much to look into, and looking into our area, there's so much history there, and there's 572 nationally recognized tribes. There's a lot of people to look into, but mm-hmm. It's there. There's so much there, and there's so much that can be done, and it's it's not going to take a world's worth of effort to help,
right.
or to try.
Right.
It's
how
just
do you
that
do
easy.
That small part in where you are?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time with you, Jess.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad for the opportunity. I like chatting with you, and it's been a while. So.
Yeah, it has been a very long time. So.